G'day, welcome to the Off-Chain Podcast. Don here with you, and our co-host today, guest, is tech futurist Theo Priestley. It's going to be an interesting conversation. We're going to talk about the metaverse. We're going to talk about AI. We're certainly going to talk about future tech. This is Theo's wheelhouse. He has published over 400 articles about the future of technology. He's been a TEDx speaker. He's the author of The Future Starts Now. He founded Metanomic, which is an AI analytics platform based in Edinburgh. He knows what he's talking about. He's worked with a number of the biggest names in enterprise tech, like startup accelerators like HTC, Vivex VR Incubator, Alchemist, one of Silicon Valley's top 10 accelerators. He has the ability to create compelling stories that drive imagination, inspire, and engage with a diverse range of audiences. It's going to be a very interesting conversation. So let's get stuck into our convo with Theo. Theo, thanks for joining us today on the Off-Chain Podcast. Theo, how did you get started thinking about technology? What did that look like for you?
Oh, blimey! If you look all the way back, if I want to wind the clock back all the way, then it's probably when I first picked up my first comic book.
Yeah, right.
I collect comics. I'm a voracious reader of science fiction. In fact, I've got about 7 bookshelves filled with sci-fi books. I've got 600 of the old pulp
Wow.
short form stories, analog. Don't know if you remember in the US, basically you get little sort of short stories written by all the greats like Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, etc., all the way from the 60s all the way up to like 2010.
Yeah, right.
And they've got some great covers as well. I love the pictures and the artwork of the time that depicted science fiction and technology and visions of the future. But I mean, my interest in technology came very sort of early on, when I was younger, by reading about this stuff and then sort of thinking about, well, where's technology going to go? What's the future going to look like? And that's where the kind of sort of futurist hat that I wear today kind of sort of came into play as well.
Now,
Um,
without dating
and then
yourself, dating yourself too much, where was humankind, technologically speaking, at this time when you're becoming interested? What are we talking about? We're talking about iPhones. We're talking about
that's
internet. We're talking about
oh
personal
no, this
computers.
is yeah, this predates this stuff. I mean, I was playing with Atari VCS.
Oh yeah, yeah,
There was no internet. I had C90 cassette tapes where, where you stood by the radio and you're recording songs, the
I
top
remember.
40 songs. Yep. And then you were pausing it because the damn DJ would speak over the best part of the song.
Oh yeah,
Um, that's where I kind of grew up from.
yeah, right. And
Um,
so, interested in technology. At what point did that go from this is fascinating or really interesting to I want to think about this. I want to work here. I have some acumen here. What did that transition look like?
yeah, I mean, it was always kind of natural because playing with the Atari and then getting my first personal computer and actually coding from the back of magazines to make games. Used to get the code from that and then type it in and then find out that you typed it in wrong and it would never bloody work. But it was, I was always knee deep and messing around with new technology then. And then when I actually started a career in inverted commas, working, I was working with computers at that point, and there were people who would come to me and ask me, how does this work? What do I do with this? Because to me, it felt really natural. To other people who were slightly older than me, these things were alien technology, and they didn't know what to do. Like the mouse, for example, was a great example of something that I learnt and knew, and it became intuitive. But for someone who was like 10, 15 years ahead of me, they were running the mouse up the wall because they couldn't actually understand that you could pick the mouse up and then drag it along and pick it up and drag it along to go along the screen. So I understood what technology was doing, what it kind of sort of meant for the future of work, how it's going to be pervasive across society. And then the internet came, and that just sort of blew everything up as well. And I just grew up with every kind of sort of trend, and I just kept up with those trends. A lot of people just stopped, and there's a great quote by Douglas Adams that says, once you reach the age of like over 30, everything else becomes against the order of nature, and you're against it. Whereas I just kept going and going, in terms of trying to learn as much as I could, and there was always like shortcuts you could learn at work. by using computers. And of course, everybody's still doing paper-based work, and I'm finding shortcuts and bugs and things like that, playing around with systems. And that's just, from that, it just stemmed into, what I do today.
Yeah, right. And so you already always early adopter then by your own kind of admission there. And these days, thinking about the things that are still into the future, well, I mean present, but also into the future, things like artificial intelligence, things like metaverse, things like space and space travel, and things like that. What is it that's floating your boat particularly right now?
Yeah, I mean, the last couple of years has been really interesting because I've seen a lot of interest in Web3 and in Metaverse and in, like you say, space technology. And there's a lot of these technologies actually dovetail into each other to build something bigger. And those are the things that really sort of excite me an awful lot, because people kind of sort of treat them as silo industries. But when you actually combine them together, there's something much bigger to sort of think about. And then the bigger the bigger the vision, the bigger the impact it is on society in general. So artificial intelligence, obviously, at this point in time, we can date stamp this particular discussion and talk about sort of Chat GPT 4 that's just been released, and everybody's going, crazy over the capabilities. And you can actually understand some of the longer term ramifications in society, which is, if chat is able to do a lot of the menial work, or a lot of the creative work, or not creative, let's say, it's not going to replace human creativity, but it's going to allow us to rapidly ideate, and it will be an aid rather than an adversary, um, in our
Yeah,
working
so
environment. But if
I saw people speaking today about coders, that is specifically devs, who are saying that with ChatGPT 4 that they've been playing around with has easily 10x their output, just
Mhm.
instantly, like overnight, 10x their output. I saw someone saying that they ran a particular blockchain smart contract through ChatGPT asking for uh, essentially an audit, and ChatGPT basically came back and said, "Here are the flaws and failures. Here's how you can exploit this currently live smart contract." That kind of stuff. I mean, inherently, obviously disruptive.
Mm.
What are we? Do you think we're ready for this kind of disruption? Do we actually even understand? I want to talk about AGI, the artificial general intelligence, like Skynet, Terminator stuff. But even just with the Chat GPT 4 iteration of artificial intelligence, are we ready?
No, no, we're not by any means. I think, we're still viewing it as a sort of scary novelty. We're
Yeah.
still in that kind of sort of novelty, bright-eyed, it's a shiny object phase. Um, and we kind of need to sort of sit down and work out, well, what does this mean for different types of industries? There'll be hundreds of jobs that will be immediately impacted by this. But we have to understand to what the degree of the impact is, whether it's a serious impact and it actually removes, the need to actually have people involved in this at all, or whether it's going to accelerate some jobs and actually make them more efficient. And those are the swings that we need to kind of sort of understand. And of course, the economic impact is what happens to the people who, unfortunately might be disrupted out of a particular job because the job is quite low level and it can now be automated by something else, and a lot more cheaply. That's the other thing as well. So what do we do with those people who are now disrupted out of a particular workforce, and how do we bring them up to speed to actually get them on another different rung of the ladder that's a little bit more advanced? So it's no, we're not ready, and I think in the next sort of decade, 5 to 10 years for sure, as the iterations of chat or GPT and the large language models behind it sort of continue and become more advanced and more multimodal. So multimodal is taking voice, taking audio, taking images, taking text, taking video, and being able to do something with it, with these large language models and actually transform them. That's just going to be exponential over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, and that impact is going to be exponential, and we're just not ready for that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, especially like you say, as those multimodal um, iterations start to come out, it's both exciting. It is a little bit nerve wracking to think about how it's going to impact even things like politics, research, business, creative enterprise? I know you said before, you said creativity and then kind of discounted it, but I'm wondering how much that's going to be impacted. Maybe not today, but certainly in the near future. With I don't know, the next couple of iterations, perhaps, even just on society in general, how we relate to one another, how we relate to knowledge, how we relate to the truth, how we
Mm.
come to any sense of objectivity. I mean, you're the futurist guy. Help us understand how should we be wrangling with AI in its current form and in the forms that we can see coming on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, you hit a couple of interesting points there in terms of like knowledge and creativity. So, I mean, a lot of businesses have been built on providing a service that hits those particular points. You have creative agencies, you have consultancies, industry analysts, and things like that. But all they do is actually add another layer on top of what you're already doing within your business. And for $20 a month, you can subscribe to Chat GPT-4 through OpenAI and probably receive 85% of the service that you would receive from paying thousands of dollars to a middleman. Now that kind of makes things really interesting because a lot of these middle this middle layer that we have, this I would call it fat of society in a sense, um, are basically flying very close to the wind because they need to achieve very high utilization levels in their workforce to survive, but they don't actually make an awful lot of money. Now, if chat comes along and removes the ability to make that kind of money or to make people achieve high utilization rates, then a lot of these agencies and a lot of these consultancies are really going to struggle over the next decade to the point where they might actually collapse. And that's it's a scary prospect, I guess. And what do people do for that? I mean, again, we're not ready for that level of change in society. But what I want to see is almost like a golden renaissance of, and I mentioned this in my TEDx talk at the latter half of my TEDx talk when I was talking about would you follow a robot leader, and would you follow an algorithm, and then if AGI comes along, what do we as people do? And the idea that we cut out a lot of the really menial and non-value add work in society means that we actually, as a species, should be looking at things to do that would further civilization. And space is an interesting point towards, and fixing the climate is another one here back on Earth. So instead of processing mortgage applications, maybe we should actually try to fix, a lot of what's wrong with society in terms of inequality, and sustainability and how we treat the planet. And then the other half is, what do we do to secure our civilization, and the survival, in the stars. So
All right, so man, lots of things I'm keen to unpack in what you just said. If we go back a little bit, um, so when machinery started to become automated,
mhm.
people were saying, "Oh my goodness, everyone's going to lose their jobs." And then when information started to become very easy to produce and disseminate, people started to think, "Oh my goodness, everyone's going to lose their jobs." Internet comes, "Oh my goodness, everyone's going to lose their jobs." I'm wondering, is AI just the next, "Oh my goodness, everyone's going to lose their jobs," or is it genuinely different this time?
I think it could be genuinely different this time. And I think it's because, interestingly, you've basically painted the path with what you've said. A lot of it was mechanization and automation through industrialization. So the industrial era, basically brought about mechanized automation. And then as we moved through these trends, we became more information and digitally oriented. And actually, it becomes a lot easier to disrupt digitally than it does mechanically. So you'll find a lot of what we have built society on in terms of digital, in terms of automation, in terms of the internet age and everything else is going to be far more disrupted by artificial intelligence than the manually the manual or the industrial side of work, because we still need people to build things, we still need people to service things, physically service things. So interestingly, back in the early 90s, 2000s, when the Labour government came in, there was a big whole thing about pushing everybody to digital and computing. And of course, everybody went that way, but then there was this huge gap, employment gap, where people didn't have manual skills. So there was a shortage in laborers, a shortage in plumbers, electricians, joiners, etc., etc. Um, and then what happened was that people who were in really overworked professions like doctors and nurses and GPs and things like that, they basically left those really, I guess, underpaid, underappreciated professions, who were working long hours for low salaries. And then they took a decision to actually retrain to become plumbers, electricians, joiners, etc. Actually have a better work-life balance and a better pay, and they could dictate when they wanted to work, etc., etc. And this could be a really interesting side effect of what happens with automation of the digital age, which is all this automation takes away some of the sort of manual stuff that we still do in front of a screen, and allows us to actually explore what we can actually do as like I said, as a species with our hands and what we used to do before. So yes, it does sound a bit like scaremongering in terms of, oh, we've been here before, the industrial age, the internet age, etc., etc. But I think because we've built so much of society on digital technology, and digital is so easy to um, automate, I think things are going to be different.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so you mentioned just then, actually, the next thing that I was keen to talk about. So that's, thank you for that. You mentioned, back in the day, what humans used to do was use our hands. Back in the day, what humans used to do was organize in small family units and tribes and groups of tribes and then nations and states. And as we continue to grow and develop, and now we've got this artificial intelligence on the scene, uh, if we are going to be wholesale experiencing whole industries kind of becoming redundant, I guess, in terms of the human capacity for meaningful input and productivity, vocationally speaking, what do we go to? You mentioned things like pursuing justice. You mentioned things like pursuing good stewardship of our environment. Those kinds of things. My question is, given that you brought up your TEDx talk, would you follow talking about would you follow a robot leader? Who who gets to decide? Back in the day, you decide as a small family unit or in your tribe. The tribe would decide
Hmm.
this is what's best for us and best for our tribe. We're talking about a tribe of 8 million people and not just human intelligence and collective intelligence, but now artificial intelligence. Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide what's true? Who gets to decide, what the artificial intelligence says? If we are, and I predict we are going to, just as a species, defer to artificial intelligence more and more in terms of producing meaning, producing truth. Who gets to decide?
A good question. The humans will always get to decide. There's never going to be a point where there's not going to be a human involved in the process or in the loop, or humans,
Yeah. So which human
but
is what
yeah,
I'm getting at?
so let's tackle this in a number of ways. One, there's never going to be one artificial intelligence or Skynet or whatever. I think we can put that notion aside.
Hmm.
We're already seeing, so there's OpenAI, Meta's now wanting to dump the metaverse and try and focus on AI now because, Zuckerberg realized how wrong he was.
Yeah. Good
Um,
move. Just a year too slow.
you know, um, Google's got theirs. They've just released, their AI tools throughout their entire workspace product suite. So there's going to be a number of large technology companies who are now going to be chasing this, and want to release their own version. Apple will probably do their own at some point as well, or buy it in and then change it.
Surely.
So there's a
Elon
lot of
Elon reckons he has the most advanced AI already. He's just
yeah,
not
he
making
wants
it
to
publicly.
he wants to open source it as well because he's not happy
Yeah.
with OpenAI now monetizing it. So
With his
that
billion
we're
dollar
going to see.
investment.
Yeah. I wish I had that money. So we're going to see that. We're going to see a pervasive, a number of artificial intelligences, and there'll be competing ones. There's never going to be one that's going to encompass everything. Um, but who gets to decide? Well, obviously, we have to start thinking about AI ethics and what access of information does it need to do perform its function, um, and who's in charge of those ethics. But humans are very good at providing lots of talking shops and researchers and think tanks that spend lots of money and lots of time writing research reports, but no one ever steps forward to actually say we're going to be the ones who actually sort of rubber stamp whether this AI is ethically bound by human principles or not. The other
Haven't we
interesting
kind of
point.
already had this though with both social media and with search, where sure we've had, there's not one singularity or singular search, but there kind of is, or has been at least for the last decade, and there's not really one social media, although there are a couple and some
Mm,
are particularly powerful and pointed. And so, in as much as you can say, yeah, there won't be one artificial intelligence or uh, large language
large
model or
lang.
anything like this, there has been one search, even though there's been many. And so that one search has kind of, in a sense, dictated this is how it goes
Mm.
until, and presuming that something artificial intelligence wise could disrupt that monopoly that they've had. But then will that just replicate itself with AI?
So the question is who has access to the most data,
Right.
to be able to train all of this, and then can you ethically train your AI or your large language model with that data, because you're not basically ripping it off. You're not taking creators' copyright and using it to create something new and claim it's new. Is the information openly available? And this is a thing, we've actually gone through this weird cycle of the web started off as being quite closed, owned, self-owned, self-governed, to being completely open, to being owned by large corporations who now dictate what provide those services for free, but obviously understand that you are the product if the product is free, and you're providing all that information and that data,
Yeah.
and eventually all that data is now basically being used to train all these AI to make them as intelligent and as knowledgeable as possible. With all those multiple creative inputs, perspectives, research, etc., etc. Um, so in a way, we've brought about this ourselves, and this is where I think Web3 kind of sort of steps in a little bit. And I would go back to your comment about communities and tribes and stuff like that, because I mean, one of Web3's most, I guess, most powerful principles or concepts is this idea of communities and tribes. And I've spoken to a number of people about using those principles and those principles of decentralized autonomous organizations, um, back into society itself, not to create crypto projects and NFTs, but how would you use the concepts of Web3 and a DAO in a local authority that would actually give the control back to the community, and what they would do and vote with the local authority or the government money that's usually provided to the services that they really want to see, um, it being spent on to improve the community, rather than the local authority being the overall governor and basically spending it on really crap projects. I mean, let's put it this way: I think every local authority in the UK and across the world spends money where they shouldn't do, and normally it goes against where the local community really wants it and really needs it. So could a DAO and could Web3 principles and the ideology around that solve that? And then you look at, well, how could Web3 encroach into the whole artificial intelligence and provide that almost like a layer of governance and a layer of data sovereignty that says, in order for you to provide this artificial intelligence, you're going to have to prove to us, who are custodians of this particular subset of data or personal information or whatever, that you're going to use it ethically. And if you're not, and if you can't satisfy our criteria, then you're not going to basically get access to this information, and therefore your AI is never going to be all encompassing, whole. It's not going to give people a true reflection. So there's some really interesting competing ideals here, and I think, shooting off the top of my head, I think Web3 could actually play a really interesting part in in the whole artificial intelligence side of things. I think a lot of people sort of go, oh, nobody talks about Web3 anymore because AI is so shiny, so everybody's talking about Web AI and stuff like that. But this goes back to my point about, when I made about there's so many different trends being treated as silos, but you
Yes.
could actually start joining the dots. And this is something that I've done a lot in my time, which is try to sort of tug on a thread and see which other thread far down the road is actually tugging with it, and then join it together and see what happens.
Yeah, that sounds really good. But on your back to your point about how could we use a DAO in a neighborhood, in a city, in a state,
Mm-hmm.
in a country, for example, over the last couple of years, perhaps experts, experts have got a bad rap, but surely if we the more like direct democracy that we have in terms of, like I said, the people who it impacts the most making decisions may not be making the best decisions, or making decisions that are good for today but not necessarily good for tomorrow, or good for the immediate but not necessarily good for the whole, or good for their neighborhood but not good for the city, etc.
Mm-hmm.
um, what is the place for experts in a DAO or in a distributed um, let's say, democratic process? And maybe how can we benefit from AI in that process as well? Any thinking
Yeah, I mean, they
around
could.
these things?
Yeah, I mean, they could form part of the actual governance side of things. So, I mean, I wrote about a couple of concepts. One is like a DAO of DAOs, which is basically you have a DAO and then there are sub DAOs in between, and obviously they all report into the governance side of things, but each one is a self-governing autonomous organization in itself, and that could work in from like a city going down to local authority, regional or community-based authorities. um, but overall, what those decisions have to make, and the money that's spent and the initiatives that they approve have to serve the overall the city itself, and that's a city DAO in a sense. And you could transpose that into organizations as well. So organizations, rather than become pure hierarchical, could actually become DAOs themselves and have miniature, sub DAOs that execute projects based on the vision that's governed by um, you know governed or set in, as a principle. um, and there's interesting things from way back in the past in terms of 18th or 17th century pirates. Pirates were the first to actually come up with democracy, um,
All
and the
right.
pirate code. Yeah, I've basically um, tracked, or basically tried to trace piracy, not piracy as in internet, but piracy as in ye old Caribbean stuff, and how ships were governed by the captain and by then the first mate, and how everything basically filtered down to the crew, and um, and then translated that into how Web3 was basically forming, and DAOs, and there's a really interesting parallel between piracy, pirate democracy, and how DAOs work. And to the point where I actually bought one of the biggest big thick book from I found a first edition copy, because I really like books, and I found a first edition copy of this thing, which is essentially it's called like the Bible on pirates.
All right.
um, and it's great. It's a great read, and I just
Anything we
started
should
digging
be
into that.
learning? Anything that we should be incorporating from piracy into, again, talking about, the R kind of pirates, into Web3, DAOs, blockchain thinking?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could read the blog I wrote. It's actually, it's a little bit more entertaining than I could probably spit it out as. But
Okay.
yeah. I mean, there's interesting parallels on history, and I think that's another thing, is that there are so many things that we've done in a historical point of view, that we completely ignore and then repeat the same mistakes,
Yeah.
thinking that we know better. I call it teenage arrogance, and I saw a lot of that with the metaverse and the Web3 side of things, where it's like, we know better, we know Web2 is rubbish, and we're going to do things differently. And then you're like, but what you're doing is exactly what Web2 did 20 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah, but we know this is Web3, and it's like, but it's this. Oh, never mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I was asking before about when you talk about AI and people say it's different this time. Every time I hear someone say it's different this time, my mind just goes, well, they've said that. Like I've lived through many market cycles in crypto, many market cycles just
Mm,
in general, a couple of global and localized recessions and market crashes and technological advances and whatnot. And every time people say this time it's different, and I like the old saying, history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it certainly rhymes. And
mm.
it's that same old thing of, oh, it's different this time, it's different this time. And so I go, well, is it different this time? But certainly with the internet, it was different. With mobile, it was different. And with AI, it seems like it's different. Like it's more meaningful, deeper, systemic kind of changes are afoot.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at look at the cycle that we've gone through with like AR, VR, and the metaverse, for example. Um, people are saying, "Oh, it was different this time," but the thing is that VR, AR, virtual worlds, metaverse, all that combination of things, it always feels like it's another it's another 5 or 10 years away. And that's another thing that people always say, oh, it's another 5 years away, don't worry, it's coming, it's coming. And it's
Yeah,
like, well, we've been saying that for the last 20, 30 years, it's always
yeah,
coming. But the thing is that those those kind of sort of technologies are never pervasive because they involve such a step change.
right.
um, it, right, so what do I mean by step change? Well, um, so AR and VR and mixed reality, whatever you want to call it, they require you to physically stop and do something and interact with something else to get to the same goal. It adds another set of processes, another layer of interaction to achieve something that you could do quite simply with what you've got around you. Um, and it's the same with the metaverse as well. And we have our vision of where we need to be is always going to be ahead of what the technology can actually provide. Everybody's talking about, oh, seamless experience, and you can't tell the real world from the fake world and stuff like that. But the processing power and the technology, the hardware technology, just isn't there to be able to realize that, at scale in front of 6, 7 billion people. This is the other thing, is that people, oh yeah, it's so easy. Oh, Fortnite is really high fidelity, and look at meta humans from Unreal and stuff like that. And I was like, right, who's got the power to basically stick that in front of 8 billion people?
Yeah.
Where's the compute for that? And then and what's the device? How are you going to get, oh yeah, VR's the world, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, right, okay, well, who's going to build 8 billion VR devices? And why would you, and who's going to furnish, 8 billion people with the computers to be able to handle that? Um, those other extra peripherals and things like that. And where's the internet speed that's going to be able to, support all of that throughput, etc., etc. We don't have it, and
It's
we
5
probably
years
never
away.
will.
It's just
That's
5 years
5 years
away.
away. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Don't worry
You
about
know,
it.
so um, so the ideas of having this, some of this stuff is not going to happen, and it does feel like, oh, we've been here before, or it sounds very familiar and it rhymes. Whereas artificial intelligence, like I said, because it's built on much of the fabric of society as it stands today, it's far easier to disrupt and have an impact on everybody because everybody's connected to the internet, everybody uses
Yeah.
some form of social media, wherever. um, and and that's far easier to hit everybody at once rather than saying to people, come and buy this £300 or $3,000 headset and be part of this tiny small community, instead, that all run around in whatever virtual world and stuff like that, because it's not everybody can experience it. And that's the
Yeah.
problem that we have with all these other kind of sort of emerging trends like the metaverse, um, is that
So
for
you've
it to
spent a lot
be.
of time. You spent a lot of time working on the metaverse. What are you thinking about the metaverse now? Obviously, Meta is essentially ditching the metaverse, or at least they're kind of they're pulling back or refocusing on AI.
Hmm.
What where are we at with metaverse? Is metaverse gonna be a thing? I mean, is it really a thing? I mean, I know there are people building metaverses. You have built a metaverse. What does that? What's the future of metaverse as it stands at the moment? In the, let's say the near future, 2 to 5 years.
Now, 2 to 5 years, I think it's just going to be more disappointment, and it certainly rings. It rings. It rhymes, shall we say, rhymes with what we did before with like Second Life.
Yeah.
And these other sort of earlier attempts. So Second Life was really interesting because it was one platform. At that point in time, there was only that one platform, and everybody piled in and thought, yeah, this is great. We're all going to live here and we're all going to work here. And IBM spent $10 million at that point in time, big, a lot of money, $10 million and resources building exact duplicates or building an IBM building to basically bring their clients in to have a discussion that you would normally do. Who needs to fly when I can speak to someone in this? you know, um, and then everything started to fall apart a couple of years later because people realized that it's not natural to work and live there and stuff like that. And you need Dell had an interesting video on YouTube which basically explained their experience with Second Life and some of the lessons learned. And one of the big lessons was you need to continually have a reason for people to come and visit you,
Mhm.
which means it's not a one-off project. You don't just build something, build and they will come. You don't build a building, or in Dell's case, it was Dell Island to watch your laptop being made. You could order it there in a virtual environment and watch it being made, and then you would get it delivered physically to your house. Um, you did it once. You went to Dell Island, and then you had no real compelling reason to actually go back in and do it again and again. And that was the thing, is that you need to have a compelling reason to continually visit. So when you see people saying, "Oh, Roblox is great," well, Roblox is really good for as a gaming platform and to build creator experiences. But for brands, I think what they have to realize is this is a continual line item on their marketing budget to to continually develop experiences that are going to make people want to come in. And then how do you actually, and this is a real killer point, how do you actually track what your ROI is? So for Nightland, for example, and things like that, people go into Nightland and they have, they muck about and they have a good time for about 5-10 minutes to an hour. um, where does that track to an actual physical purchase? It doesn't. There's no mechanism right at the stands that actually allows a business to understand what a consumer does or what a person does in that world that tracks back to a real line item on their revenue balance sheet. So we've got a lot of thinking in terms of how to connect these experiences for a start. And then when you look at Second Life versus where we are today, Second Life was one platform, everybody piled in, and it was one world. Where we have today, we've got Decentraland, we've got Sandbox, we've got Roblox, we've got Minecraft, we've got Fortnite, we've got XYZ. We've got a myriad of different platforms, and nobody actually knows where to build. So do I build in one place or another because it has the most users, or do I build my own experience and hope that people are going to come to me? And then how do any of these experiences actually connect to each other? Because that's what the metaverse is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a bunch of all interconnected experiences that I can just jump into one, leave, jump into another
Yes,
one,
it's supposed to be
etc.
meta. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not, that doesn't work. Everybody wants to own their island or islands, and their piece of the world, but nobody wants to actually connect it to the other virtual worlds yet. And that's not going to happen for the next couple of years either. So I think the promise of interoperability, the promise of blockchain, Web3, metaverse, everything all tying together and being built, and it's all going to be hunky dory over the next 2 to 3 years, is it's not going to happen. And I think now with what's interesting as well is that everybody thought Web3 and the metaverse were kind of intrinsically tied, which they are to a certain extent. But everybody thought that it was going to, the two of them were actually going to join forces and actually make this Web3 was going to drive a lot of this, whereas actually fact, if you look at what's happening with the likes of Disney, Starbucks, McDonald's, etc., all the big Web2 brands are the ones that are actually bringing the customer base into Web3. It's not Web3 bringing people to Web3, it's Web2 bringing people to Web3 or Web3 principles. And in the
Yeah.
end, the ownership of the assets and the ownership of the people, the ownership of the data still sits in Web2. So Web3 kind of has fallen flat on its promise by over promising, under delivering, and then letting the Web2 guys come in and step in and say, we'll show you how it's done.
Well, even as you're talking about problems with the metaverse, many of those things could be just directly applied to or set of Web3 and blockchain as well. So, where do you go? Do you go over here? Do you build on this blockchain? Do you build on that blockchain? Do I just do my
Mm.
own blockchain? Do you follow with the crowd? Do you follow the liquidity? How do you do it? And all the while, people are exactly as you say, trying to say, well, we're trying to onboard people into crypto, where or into blockchain. Whereas it seems to me, kind of like what you're saying, the better thing to do is just to build great things, build them with blockchain and with artificial intelligence, and perhaps even with a metaverse or metaverse angle or something like that, and try to utilize everything that we can to actually make something really awesome that people want to come and engage with, rather than just saying, "Hey, blockchain's awesome, come use it," or "The metaverse is awesome, come use it." Where, like you say, you go, you take the photo, buy the shirt, and go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it was the technology pushed at the front of these discussions, and nobody cares about the technology. The technology should be invisible, and a lot of the times, frankly, blockchain is boring. It's infrastructure. You should not be
Supposed to be.
talking. It's like, well, yeah, it's like talking about. It's like building. It's like building Uber. But instead of saying, "Oh, we're a taxi service and we get your taxi there when you want it," it's like we're a cloud-based company and we have a mobile app and we're all about cloud and mobile technology and blah blah blah. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, what do you do? What's this? Why is it important to me to use it? Oh, cloud, and mobile. And it's like, no, tell me what you do. What's the benefit to me? Why should I use you? And that's what was happening with like Web 2, with Web 3, and with blockchain and with crypto and stuff like that. Was that it was always about it was the wrong conversations that were happening, and of course people just don't care, unless
Well,
they understand what the benefit is to them, how it improves their daily life. That's the thing.
yeah. Well, so let's apply that thinking to this conversation, and say, what for people watching or listening, how should we be thinking about these things? What does it mean for me? How can I avoid the pitfalls of, say, my vocation or my passion getting absorbed by AI? How do I profit? So how do I invest wisely? What does it mean for me? How do we actually put some of the things we're speaking about today? Like if I want to start a DAO in my neighborhood, or if I want to talk to my local representative about getting better representation and utilizing blockchain technology to do so, what's the next step for us as humans? What's the next step for us as individuals, people listening or watching now?
Yeah, in terms of sort of AI, if we take that one first, I think it's the easiest way to sort of look at this is actually just play around with it and get involved, and understand what you as a singular person, or maybe in your company or whatever, can actually do with this particular piece of technology that can improve, not look at it as a big scary monster that's actually going to eat up everything that you do. Is how could you actually improve what you do and the services that you provide to your own customers, or your employees or whatever? How can it actually improve what they do? Like I said, treat it as an aid, not an adversary, and you'll understand that being able to, letting people actually sort of play around with this stuff and then come back to you with suggestions on how it improves their lives, um, is really important. It's that feedback loop that I think is missing from a lot of things. In terms of like Web3 and DAO, it's very much a case of, what does it what will it achieve on a sort of societal scale that will improve things beyond just, oh, it's crypto and blah blah blah. I mean, I think it's really important to try and remove the crypto side of things, because of the sort of friction it involves. Try to look at the human problems that you're trying to solve with Web3, with DAOs, with artificial intelligence, with Metaverse. Metaverse is quite interesting because people go, oh, but you can come in and play around and visit our shop. And it's like, but why would I want to go into an exact 3D representation of your shop online, and you're actually forcing me to walk around, the aisles of your shop and to pick out clothing or pick out an item of food, to interact with, when I can do that as 10 times faster on a web page,
Yeah,
with a
totally.
static 2D web page, or if I really want to go outside and breathe fresh air, I can do that already. The whole point of the metaverse was to actually create experiences that people don't have already, not to recreate the experiences that they already have. So again, what can I create that actually people can have fun and engage with, that's completely different to what they're used to, but also impacts them on a daily basis. The thing with like Web3, for example, is that DApp Radar was tracking 19,000 apps or DApps, and the majority of them were just links to different decentralized exchanges, and it's like, well, that you're essentially cannibalizing the same audience time and again. With a finite audience of people who are interested in this thing, you're just developing for the same people rather than developing services on Web3 and blockchain technology that people use on a day-to-day basis. I mean, the easiest thing to do is look on your phone and see, do you have Uber? Do you have, Just Eat, Deliveroo, Uber Eats? You got a travel thing. You got Google Wallet or Apple Wallet or Apple Pay or whatever. All these type of things that you use on a day-to-day basis could easily be disrupted by something that applies Web3 and blockchain technologies in a decentralized fashion, improves it, doesn't necessarily have to tie in crypto and force people to use crypto, but can add it as an option, but essentially bring people in that way rather than forcing people to come to you and say, oh, we've got this decentralized exchange, you must use this. And it's like, well, I don't use it anyway, so it has no benefit to me on a day-to-day basis. So always look at things to improve something that people use on a day-to-day basis. And even if you make a 5% improvement, that could be enough for some people, and that's a target market. That's much bigger than trying to force people into a funnel in Web3. Um, and in terms of investment, well, I'm not going to give out any investment advice here,
Sure.
but I think it's very easy to get caught up with the trends and with the hype. I've spent a lot of time basically telling people and peeling back the veneer to see what's underneath the hood and to sort of see where this particular trend might track. Everybody's talking about building generative AI tools, for example, but then you look at it and you say, right, well, who actually owns the infrastructure here? Well, it's OpenAI. Everybody is building something on top of what OpenAI is doing. And then, what's your revenue model? Why would someone pay more to you? Because you will have to charge more than OpenAI because you're using their service. So what's your revenue model going to be tied to that makes you profitable, but also negates, having to pay, an expensive license fee and API calls to OpenAI? Can you build a sustainable business on that? And is there enough of a differentiator to make people come to you instead of using the source product itself? Um, and then of course, if you're an investor, you're going to be hit with everybody claiming we can do this and we can do that, and really all it is just a glossy front end in front of what's already been built before. And to investors suffering fear of missing out, who just want to be deploying capital anywhere that seems exciting, they can get, they can lose a lot of money, and of course they'll get hit by their LPs asking serious questions. So take a step back from the trends, I think, is the only investment advice I can give, and actually really take some time to understand um, just what it is that you really want to invest in and whether it's actually still going to be around in 5 years' time.
All right, man, that's good advice. I know you just said you don't want to give advice, but then you gave good advice. So,
Well, I'm not going to tell. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you who to invest in.
oh, sure, 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 yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah,
good. So
yeah.
you mentioned treating these technologies as an aid, not an adversary. Getting to actually see, like, learn it, experience it. Get your hands dirty with it.
Mm,
Work on giving people experiences they cannot get otherwise. Not just trying to duplicate what they already can do. That's really good. Or improve things that they're already using, and then think about how do you actually make money out of this, not just pumping up a glossy UI to the same LLM everybody else is using.
yeah.
And then again, I like the taking a step back from the trends and actually considering, what is this? What's my time horizon? Will this thing actually even exist in 5 years' time? That's a good non-advice, but good thinking. We'll just
Yeah.
call it. We'll call it
I, I, I'll,
non-advice.
I'll add I'll add one more non-advice thing, and it's
Sure.
quite interesting actually looking at the whole Web3 scene as well. You know, a lot of people were making a lot of people were like focusing on like the creator economy, so music, art, video, etc., etc. And how do we democratize that and give that back to the creators and make sure that they get their royalty fees and people can get involved in the projects and things like that, and ownership of particular items. And music was one of these things. And it's like, right, you have to understand consumer sentiment. So it's a very noble effort to say, I want to give back to the artist and I want to own the artist's work and give them the royalties directly, not through the middlemen, through the agency, through the licensing authorities, through Spotify, etc. But you've got to understand the consumer sentiment, which is why would a consumer who is paying $15 a month to Spotify to access bazillion levels of music and create playlists, etc., why would they change that habit to paying $15 for one item from one artist? And I think that's the mind shift switch that hasn't happened in Web3 yet. Certainly on mass from the consumer point of view. I think it's a
We only
lot of
just got that
Web3.
mindset over the last 10
Well, yeah,
years
exactly.
to get into
Yeah, yeah,
streaming. So getting back is going to be a
yeah.
tough one.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's where the ownership aspect kind of sort of falls down. In terms of digital ownership or physical ownership again is the price difference from the convenience of the renter economy to basically going back to the ownership economy just doesn't track.
Yeah.
Um, and that's I know a lot of people have tinfoil hats on about the whole UN or the WHO or whoever it is, saying you will own nothing and you will rent everything and you will be happy, etc.,
WEF. Yep.
etc. But yeah, oh, WEF, yeah, yeah. But that's where we are right now. Is that everybody is happy because they're paying for that convenience, but then consequently, it's interesting watching the shift in cable unbundling. I'm not paying $60 for cabling, and half of it's crap. No, but now I'm paying $100 for fragmented streaming services where I can't get all of the streaming content
Yep.
I want because I have to pay a bit for that one and a bit for that one and a bit for that one. So so we've kind of been duped in a sense again.
Yeah, man. Hey, we are running out of time. But I do want to ask you, what's your hope for the metaverse? What's your hope for AI? What's your hope for Web3? And if we can just chuck in kind of space travel in there as well. Ultimately, what's your hope for humanity when it comes to
Mm.
the future and technology?
Um, so I would like to see like I said, and it's the latter half of my sort of TED talk touches on this as well. Is that I think the combination of these particular sort of technologies can usher in almost like a renaissance period where people realize that a lot of the work we do actually simply does not add value to society at all. And then by removing a lot of those tasks and that work, it actually frees up people to do what they want to do.
Can you give an
To
example of
earn,
that work? What is that work that doesn't add value?
oh, oh well, mortgage processing, anything. Banking doesn't really add value. There's a lot of banking that doesn't add value. Insurance doesn't really add value. Lawyer, a lot of you only have to walk along the sides, the high street or whatever, to sort of see that a lot of what's happening out there. Stand in the middle of a supermarket and actually listen to conversations and see how miserable people are, and they're miserable because they have no fulfillment in life. They wanted to do something, but because of circumstances in society, meant that they had to do something else just to eke
Right.
a living
Yeah.
and survive. And I think these technologies, the thing is, well, these technologies can offer us a mind shift, but also a step change in how we view society. But the thing is that society has to come along with those with those changes. And that also means that the governments have to come along with those changes. And perhaps that's where the ideas of democratization and decentralization come into play, which is giving the people back some of the control in a community or a tribe sense, and the governance and the power to enact some of those changes in order to take advantage of the disruption that's taking place with AI and things like that, and then give that creative power or that sense of purpose and agency again back to people. And I think maybe that's the key thing, is that some of these technologies can enable a different sense of purpose and agency for civilization than where it's headed just now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a commendable goal, something worth working towards, and something worth prompting others to think about and work towards as well. It's good, man.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online and find out more about what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I write for my own media publication, which is at Theo, and I have a side publication called To the Stars, which is basically just where I hive off some of the thoughts about space, the space industry. But yeah, you'll find me stirring up a hornet's nest on LinkedIn mainly.
And avoiding Reddit for a little while, lest you be involved
Yeah,
in
just the
snow
sci-fi
crash
channels.
somehow.
Yeah.
Oh boy, Theo, thanks for joining us today, man. Really appreciate it. Hope to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Off-Chain Podcast with our guest co-host, Theo Priestley. It was interesting, perhaps even controversial, but I hope it was maybe inspirational, certainly educational, and you learnt a lot this week. As always, please like, subscribe, or even better yet, spread the word by sharing this episode with a friend, and join us again next week for another exciting episode of Off-Chain.